Du dürftest jetzt nur nicht verspätet haben. Ja, ich will mal gucken, ob ich es nicht früher aufhören kann. Ja. Ja, ich hole mal ein Glas Wasser. Ich hole mal ein Glas Wasser, ja. Das sieht er schon geguckt hat. Jetzt in der Rede. So, ach so. Ja. Das ist ja keine Weltbewegung, aber. Der ist ja insofern genial, dass wir dann schnell nachher auch machen können.
When are we going to start this session? Daphne, I need some guidance.
What?
When are we going to start?
In 2 minutes.
Okay, so we will start the session in 2 minutes.
The time, huh? Kostakis is not here.
What time is it?
Honestly, you have to start, huh?
Okay. Okay, let's start again the session. We have the new session that is about the new challenges of the Federalist movement for the coming years. The discussion will recall the Montreux Declaration, shows its enduring importance in view of the urgent request for peace and global security. The Federalist approach for the new global challenges, such as climate change, disinformation, fake news, digitalization, sustainable development, equality, will be presented for preparing the future, a step towards a democratic world federation. To speak about this important panel, we have many panelists: Joe Leinen, Guido Montani, John Blasto, Georgios Kostakos, Pablo Gomez, Giorgio Romagninos, and Monica Frassoni. But now I give the panel to Andreas Bummel, who will moderate the panel. And Andreas Bummel is the director of Democracy Without Borders. Thank you, Andreas, and I give you the panel.
Thank you very much, Nicola, and welcome to all who is here in person, and of course a welcome to our participants and speakers who are joining online. This panel, as Nicola has pointed out, is about the next steps and the future of the World Federalist movement, and of course World Federalist action. And the future, in my opinion, that would include the immediate next steps and actions that are in front of us in practical terms right now, but also the long-term perspective, for sure, based on the history and the achievements that we have learned about in the previous sessions. I will only would like to give a broad context of the obvious situation we are now in, which is characterized by a set of concerning trends. For instance, the trends of autocratization across the world that is contradictory to everything federalism and world federalism stands for. This includes, as the worst manifestation, the illegal Russian attack on Ukraine that has shaken not only the European security order, but that is also shaking, of course, the idea of the rule of law and international law in general terms, and the idea of multilateralism. And it is shaking the foundations of the UN, because we have here a permanent member of the Security Council, Russia, that is misusing its position for a war of annexation, destruction, and annihilation of a sovereign country. All of this is happening in the aftermath, or rather, during a still ongoing pandemic, the corona pandemic, that was characterized in terms of international reaction, first of all, by vaccine nationalism, not a multilateral approach. It has also shown the limits of collaborating with authoritarian states, in this case, China, which has not allowed, even to this day, an independent and effective investigation into the origins of the COVID pandemic and the virus in Wuhan or elsewhere. We are dealing also at the same time with the climate crisis. The COP27 conference has just taken place in Egypt with results that some would consider insufficient. We are dealing with food insecurity and war, not only in Ukraine, but for instance, a long ongoing war in Yemen, on Tigray or other places. The societal order in Afghanistan has collapsed. There are geopolitical tensions with China. And unfortunately, there are many more trends. This is only the tip of the iceberg that are ongoing at this point. So the question is, I believe, what is the role of world federalism in this? What can world federalism offer? Is world federalism relevant in these dark times? And what can we actually do? Without further ado, I believe we should enter into the discussion. As Nicola has mentioned, we have a set of very interesting speakers. I have been informed as a moderator that we should have a slight change in the order of speakers, and I would like to ask whether everybody agrees. I have been told that Monica Frassoni for scheduling reasons, should be called first. Is that correct?
If not first, not the last.
Not the last, but okay. But since if Jo Leinen would agree, we would give Monica the floor first. It depends on both of your schedules, which I don't know.
Up to you.
Jo,
I can.
you can do a second? Okay. So as planned, Jo, you will have the floor first. Jo Leinen requires actually no introduction in the field of Federalists, of course. He has been a long-time member of the European Parliament. He has chaired the Environmental Committee and the Constitutional Committee. In the last legislative period, he was also chair of the EU-China delegation, so he knows some things also about this complicated relationship. It has become even more complicated now. Of course, Jo was also for a long time president of the Union of European Federalists. He's now, rightfully so, the honorary president of the European Federalists. And in addition, both of us, we have been collaborating for a very long time on the project for a UN Parliamentary Assembly as a step towards a global parliament. Jo, do you think, if I may ask this, that the UN Parliamentary Assembly project in this situation is still relevant? Or is it perhaps even more relevant than before, as multilateralism is under attack? The UN Parliamentary Assembly proposal has been identified as a key priority for world federalism for a long time. Do you believe that it is still a priority like it was in the past? And you can, of course, offer a few words for those who are not familiar with the proposal about what is it, Parliamentary Assembly? And of course, any other comments are very welcome. I am informed that each speaker has 7 minutes and then some mobile phone will ring, so we don't miss this. So your time is running now. Thank you very much for joining us online.
Yeah, dear Andreas and all your friends in Brussels. Unfortunately, I have later this afternoon a conference in Berlin, which I was committed since long, so I cannot be with you, but I'm totally in spirit and in mind with you. Is that not working?
We have a technical issue at the moment because we cannot hear you. And I hope that, I'm sorry about this, I hope our technician will be able to solve this.
Oh.
I will let you know. Sorry about this.
Speak.
It's not working?
No.
It's very low.
Not working? Oh, I can go closer. That better?
It's very hard. I mean, we don't know whether the problem is on your end or on our end. I assume. Okay, I'm told that we cannot change it here. So
maybe you can raise the volume.
Yeah, I have done it till the end. It is completely raised.
Okay, it's better.
No, wait. No, yeah, it was my mistake. I put it down. Can you hear me now?
It's better, but
no?
not
it's very low. It's very low.
It's miserable.
You might need to shout
No,
for 7 minutes.
Okay,
it's difficult.
Then continue with Monica.
Okay.
Hold on.
We are told we should put the earphones on.
Is it not working?
Okay.
Do you have it?
We can hear you well.
Okay, let's try this with earphones.
I think the issue is within the parliament.
Is it better now?
Yes,
No.
we can use the earphones and then it works.
Oh, sorry.
It's channel 1. Sorry about this, but I guess it's solved now. Everybody can use the earphones, so we won't reduce that from your 7 minutes, of course.
Yeah, again, I'm with you in spirit and in Federalist philosophy, but I have a conference in Berlin later this afternoon, so I'm far away. Anyway, I remember the 50th anniversary of the Montreux Declaration. As those who have been there, we have been in the Grand Hotel in Montreux, the European Federalists and the World Federalists. And as former president of UAF, in my speech in the synthesis, I said the 19th century was the century of liberalism with liberal ideas. The 20th century was the century of socialism with social welfare state. And the 21st century must be the century of federalism and federal solutions. We are now 8 billion people on planet Earth, and every major challenge is transnational. It's no more national, it's transnational. We know it very well, from climate to health to cyber, not to speak about the economic and financial institutions that are dysfunctional. And our problem is the division of human beings in almost 193 national states. So the political order is completely dysfunctional to the challenges that people face. And therefore, I think you have discussed it in the first plenary, we need federal transnational solutions. So happily, the EU is a role model. We are the most advanced, and I'm as well fighting for a convention to kill the veto, to get the European lists, to have sovereignty with own resources, and as well, let's say, a defense union, among many other things that we need. But Andreas, your question was then focusing on a wider, bigger picture. Indeed, we have as Federalists to refocus again, for those who have not done it all the time, on global governance. We have seen in this century that global problems get more and more in the forefront. And the UN system is just not fit for purpose. The UN system has good intentions, but as we see it today, it's a shame how many of the big issues are not tackled and are not able to be solved. And I think we have a good opportunity. In 2024, there is the Summit for the Future that Guterres is calling the world to come together. And it must be the civil society which has to get active, especially the Federalist society and movement, to have conceptual ideas about innovations in the UN system. And you named it, Andreas, the UN is composed of the governments in the General Assembly, and the directed elected representatives of the citizens, the parliamentarians, are completely out. And it's our federal mission that political power has to be based and legitimized by the sovereign, and that are the citizens. So it's a high time to introduce a parliamentary assembly in the UN system. And I think this is more urgent than ever, because the General Assembly represents only the majorities in the countries and not the opposition. So I have seen it many times in New York, how this system of diplomats and bureaucrats is stuck and no more able to dynamic and to move. And I think starting with the example of the European Parliament to be a consultative body at the first stage, parliamentary assembly in the UN would give new dynamics, would be more inclusive, more democratic, and more transparent. And it has many tasks already from the beginning: scrutinize the UN budget, raise questions to the relevant institutions, the General Assembly or the Security Council. And we have seen that this idea is more and more supported by NGOs, by parliamentarians, and we hope as well by some governments in the near future. Citizens First would as well look for a citizens' initiative on the global level. We have the example in the EU, good, it's embryonic, it has its ups and downs, but it is a good element to connect citizens to that transnational era of policy making and decision making. And therefore, I think Parliamentary Assembly Citizens Initiative, that should be an issue for World Federalist Movement and the European Federalists. I know that many others will join us, like it was for the International Criminal Court, where we have been the first ones, and then hundreds and thousands of NGO came in. And I see that these good ideas have the potential to grow as a global citizens movement and to succeed. To finish, maybe, when they made the UN Charter in 1945, they had the Article 109 because they knew that it was not enough what has been done. And the Netherlands delegation at the time urged to have an article in the Charter, the Article 109, which calls for revision after 10 years when it came into operation. But as you know, in 1955, we had the Cold War, and never the UN Charter was changed. So I think as well, this is an opportunity with the Summit of the Future, at least to start a process to reflect on the review of the UN Charter and to get federal elements in it in the next draft and in the next stage. So, dear friends, I think the world needs a much better governance than we see today. The problem is this division in 193 so-called sovereign states with veto powers in the Security Council. And I think federal solutions on the global level are imminent. And let's join our forces for our Agenda 2030 to bring the next convention in the EU with big steps ahead, and with the Summit of the Future on the UN level to engage in new elements and federal elements on the global level. So these are my ideas to join you on this Jubilee conference of 70 years Montreux Declaration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Jo, for confirming essentially that you believe the UN Parliamentary Assembly, the project the WFM has been pursuing for a long time, is relevant still, and even more so with a view of the 2024 Summit of the Future. And also, thank you for raising the other proposal that is part of the We the People's campaign, namely the UN World Citizens Initiative, which together with the UNPA proposal is also a part of this new Ventotene manifesto that we have heard about in the previous session. We will have a discussion later on. Maybe you can still stay until the end, but if not, again, thank you very much. And we will now need to move on to the next speaker for the moment. And I hope you will agree that we can now give Monica Frassoni the floor out of the order that we originally had in mind. Monica Frassoni, too, needs not much of an introduction in this house, but also in Federalist circles, she is well known. I mean, she was already Secretary General of JEF, you know, long ago, but I can see it here. It is a testament to your long-standing commitment to the Federalist cause, and that's why I'm mentioning it. Of course, you have been a member of the European Parliament also for 10 years. You have had the very important position of being co-president of the European Green Party, which is very influential. And I understand that at this time you are president of the European Center for Electoral Support, which so perhaps explains, I understand, at the moment you have a special focus on democracy. With regard to strengthening democracy in the European Union and the institutions of the European Union, but perhaps also beyond. I think that would be interesting for everybody to hear your thoughts and how far the attack on democracy that we can currently experience worldwide, and many countries at least, is also a concern from a world federalist perspective and a federalist perspective in in general terms. We are very keen to hear from you. You have the floor.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation. These kind of events are very interesting and important because they allow us to think back and also to see what the future somehow will hold, at least in our perspective. And I see 3 or 4 challenges that we have to face that were probably not there when I was Secretary General of the GEF, or when I was in Montreux, indeed, for the 50 years jubilee. So first I want to say that I fully agree that there is still very much a sense in pushing for the UN Parliamentary Assembly. And there is also very much sense to link this to a general action on democracy, which probably also, contrary to how we thought about it many years ago, is much more than simply go to election every now and then, but is very much linked with the conditions on the access to participation, the freedom of those who don't agree with the mainstream, and the capacity of having an impact, notwithstanding the fact that you are not in the institutions. So I think that the issue of democracy is is actually becoming an increasingly problematic question. And it is also an increasingly complex issue, because now, and we see it in my activity as president of an organization which is doing electoral assistance projects with the European Union and beyond, and notably in Africa, you can see that the fact of having formally elections does not mean at all that you have a democratic system. And this is, and you probably saw a report that came out a few weeks ago in which it said that for the first time in decades, the democracy is actually going back in terms of real democratic countries, in the amount of countries that can be considered to be fully fledged democracy. So I think that as Federalists, what we have to do is indeed to link these different fights, and to also link the issue of democratic representation and access to democratic representation with direct democracy, and with the connection and the synergy that it is necessary to build at this level, both at local, regional, national and transnational level. Because our role as Federalists is to insist very much that you cannot have a real democracy if you have an extremely centralized system, and you cannot have a functioning democracy if everything is too spread. Yeah, and this is the case at national, but also at the international level. So I think that our role is to push very much for the existence of a transnational and the possibility of having transnational democracy, but also becoming a little bit more complex ourselves, in the sense, a bit more sophisticated, in the sense that also the project of the UN General Assembly has to be linked with the reform of the UN, with the getting rid of this Security Council functioning that is completely not only incapable of functioning, as we see during in this moment of the war in Ukraine, but has been the case for a long time, but also is reflecting a power of forces that is probably not there anymore, or it is perpetuating a way of deciding which is actually bringing no good things to the world, because is basically either acting what the powers are, for the force of power game are, but balance of powers, that's the expression I was looking for, but the balance of power, but is also doing nothing to improve actually the level of democracy and participation at the world level, and its effectiveness in stopping war is becoming less and less important. So I believe that the fight of UN, but this has been the case forever, for a long time, has always to be linked to the question of the reform of the UN, and also to the fight for transnational democracy, which of course is, as I said, to be to be filled or to be a little bit completed with an idea of democracy which is not only the one at the institutional level. So I think that these are all issues that have to be linked in our discourse by giving solutions that can and should be adopted at the different levels. Just to make an example, I think that at the national level, the experiences that have been doing, for example, in Ireland, but also in France and in other places, on citizens' assemblies, which are, I never know how you say this in English, extrait à sort, comment est-ce qu'on dit ça en anglais? When you are basically
randomly chosen.
Randomly chosen assemblies, and these randomly chosen assemblies are not just left in the woods, they're actually assisted by experts, they have time, and this has been an amazingly constructive exercise wherever it has been done. Of course, you need, as I said, time, a very focused agenda, and a good analysis and a good knowledge by the part of the people who are actually participating of what they are doing, and a delimitation of the role. But these are actually exercises which can give new blood, basically, to what democracy is today, above all in a moment and in a situation in which you have lots of technological systems that can help, but can also unhelp, that can make it even, democracy weaker and becoming, less understandable. You see in media, in the role of social media in polarizing and putting at the same level true issues and false news. This is something that has to be limited and has to be dealt with also by improving the system of participation and the culture that is going around when you're speaking about it. So just to conclude, my message is, by now what we need to do is to make this whole conversation a little bit more sophisticated, to put several issues together. And as far as the European Union is concerned, and I finish here, what we have to do is to push for a reform dynamic, be it a constitutional assembly, be it a convention. I am not rigid on that. The convention has a major issue, and that is that it depends on the Intergovernmental Conference. So what we have to do now is to fight for a convention that does not need an Intergovernmental Conference, because this is the only thing that can work. And I think that is also something that we have to push without being, blocked on constitutional method or a convention. We need to make a dynamic using the parliament, and if it is willing to be used. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Monica. I hear from your contribution that you suggest that the question of promoting democracy does need to be linked to the Federalist cause in a better way, but also in a more sophisticated way, in terms of also taking into consideration innovations such as a citizens' assembly, and this is something that we can perhaps note also for the discussion whether the World Federalist Movement should, for instance, take into consideration supporting the creation of global citizens' assemblies on specific global issues, right? So that could be one thing, which is in addition to the Citizens Initiative, which is also a participatory instrument that we are already supporting. And on top of that, I also hear from you that the Security Council needs to be addressed as part of a general look at UN reform. So this is very good. That is something we can already identify for later if we talk about conclusions. But for the moment, we would move on in our list of speakers. And I believe we will now shift a little bit more into a subject issue. We have spoken about institutions and bodies, institutional reforms and innovation. But I know that our next speaker, Guido Montani, is concerned about particularly a Green New Deal globally and the question of the environment. Guido, too, is well known among Federalist circles, of course. He's from Italy, he's an economist. He has published widely on economic questions. He's former president of the Italian section of the Union of European Federalists and a former vice president of the UEF in Europe as a whole, and professor of international political economy at the University of Pavia. So Guido, we are very keen to hear from you the Green New Deal, and perhaps that wasn't planned for, but if you can introduce some ideas how this connects to democracy and institutional innovation, if that is possible, we believe would, yes, it's only 7 minutes, that's true. Yes, we can perhaps keep that then for the discussion. You have the floor.
Yes. In August 1947, almost on the same day, the Union of European Federalists and the Movement for War Federal Government met in Montreux. It is not clear why this temporal coincidence occurred, but it is clear why the two movements decided to act separately, with separate organization. In 1946, Winston Churchill told at Fulton that an iron curtain has descended across the continent. In the same year, George Marshall launched the proposal for an aid plan to ensure political stability and peace for Europe. The onset of the Cold War showed that the atomic threat was a real threat for the future of humanity. The World Federalists were right in proclaiming that mankind can be free itself forever from war only through the establishment of a world federal government. The European Federalists were right in arguing that the Marshall Plan laid the foundations for the federal unification of Europe, at least of Western Europe. Today, in the 21st century, the situation has completely changed. The future of humanity is still threatened by a possible atomic war, but a second threat is added to this danger, the environmental crisis. Climate change and biodiversity loss are showing that an irreversible crisis in the biosphere is fast approaching, the consequences of which are quite comparable to a nuclear war on a global scale. What we, European and World Federalists, can do to deal with these emergencies? To answer this question, it is necessary to keep in mind the difference between the two threats. Nuclear weapons are the indispensable tool for states that intend to assert their power in international competition. The Soviet Union collapsed 30 years ago, and now a multilateral system of great power is fighting for world supremacy. Emerging powers such as China, India, and Brazil are forcing the old power, the United States and Russia, to compete. Arms expenditure is rising rapidly from year to year. Modern conventional armament and nuclear weapons indicate that governments divide humanity into friend and foe. The threat of a global environmental crisis is different. The European Union has approved the European Green Deal, a serious plan to achieve ecological neutrality by 2050. But the European Union pollutes only 8% of the world total. If this plan succeeds, it will not save the world if the other powers do not do the same. And it will not save European citizens either. What is true for the European Union is true for the national people, all the national peoples.
Humanity will not be saved unless a global agreed plan is implemented. The nuclear threat divides humanity. The ecological threat forces humanity to seek a common solution. This is crucial. The ecological threat forces humanity to seek a common solution. For this reason, I think that in this solemn meeting in the European Parliament, the first supranational parliament in history, the European Federalists and the World Federalists must do the opposite of what the Federalists did in 1947. Join forces for a common strategy that force national governments all over the world to avoid the accidental suicide of a human species. We must save life on the planet and save future generations. The proposal that seems reasonable to me is a global Green Deal. The national division have shown the continuing failure of the United Nations and the annual COP failure, the latter of which ended without any relevant decision in Sharm el-Sheikh. Finally, I further specify my proposal. A strategic union of European Federalists and World Federalists is needed. Therefore, a union of Federalists, only one union. Strategic union does not mean organizational union. We have the UF and we have the World Federalist Movement, who have an important history behind them and which must be engaged on different fronts. But it is possible to initiate a joint action with those who want to act. I am particularly thinking of young people, to act for a global Green Deal so that at the next COP in Dubai, we can have a first common proposal to shake the inertia of national governments and restore strength to the United Nations. Only to say, to add something Andreas asked, I don't talk about international democracy and the initiative, but of course I agree with this kind of initiative. That is only a complementary. And remember that the European Union has something proposed initiative of government like the common market without a European Parliament, but after the European Parliament, the process was going on further and further. So the two things are two parallel actions which should be done. Today, the threat of the tragedy for humanity is to have something which is similar to the atomic bomb, and we don't control this kind of policy.
Thank you very much, Guido, for proposing a strong strategic union between the Union of European Federalists and the World Federalist Movement in developing the substance of a Green New Deal to be proposed to the next COP, and for pointing out the environmental crisis as an existential threat, in addition to the threat of nuclear war that has just increased in connection with the current geopolitical situation and the war on Ukraine, obviously. So we will now hear from John Blastow, who is the chair of the executive committee of the World Federalist Movement, and as such, the one who is steering the organization, I would say, in addition, of course, to this, to our executive director and the whole team, but still, as chair of the EC, he has the position to set priorities, to suggest priorities, and to make recommendations to the movement. John has served in the military and worked in finance. He has made it at this time almost his full-time job as a volunteer to work on world federalism. I think we should have much gratitude for this commitment. And John is currently also dealing with the question of the environmental crisis. And I'm keen to, we all, I believe, are keen to hear how his ideas have developed in this regard, whether there are concrete projects, and perhaps how that might relate to the Green New Deal. John, you have the floor.
Thank you, Andreas. Andreas asked me if I really only wanted the one-sentence introduction I'd written, and I said, yeah, that's fine, but you can big it up if you want. I hadn't quite anticipated what I got. Thank you very much, Andreas, for the introduction. I'd like to thank Daphne for organising this wonderful event, and I'd like to thank the audience for their extraordinary endurance. You're all still here, so thank you very much. Joe Leinen asked for a focus on global governance and innovations in the UN system. I'm going to cover that in my talk. Fernando asked for institution building, and I've got that too. Sandro, in his introduction, asked for pragmatic solutions to pressing problems like climate change with a sense of urgency. Yeah, got that. He also interestingly asked Federalists to stop fighting each other and start saving the planet. Well, I can say, and here I may get contradiction after this event from other World Federalists, but my opinion as chair of the World Federalists, my impression is that we are currently operating pretty harmoniously, and we certainly have no fights to pick with the European Federalists, so we're good on that front too. Now, I won't take long. Maybe I'll get in ahead of the alarm here. All I want to do is make one simple request, which is for European and World Federalists to work together on an initiative to reform global governance of the environment. Because right now, as we all know, humanity, that's you and me, we're risking our future, transgressing planetary boundaries, for no other reason than that we can't quite organize ourselves to do it better. At root, we don't face an environment crisis. As we all know, it's a governance crisis. Fix governance and we can fix the environment, and, as a bonus, lay the foundation for a just, free, and peaceful world. 3 steps are needed to create the global governance we need to secure our future. First, deliberation. Now, this should obviously be structured as cooperation to serve the common good, like happens in a parliament, and not as a competition to defend narrow national interests, which is what currently happens in the UN General Assembly and the COP process. Second, there needs to be enforcement of agreed rules. And third, for that enforcement to be legitimate, there needs to be accountability. Deliberation, enforcement, accountability. Now, Europe provides all 3 through the European Parliament and European law. Now, I know it's not perfect. That's why we have European Federalists. But there's an attempt to provide those 3. But at the world level, there's not. There is no world parliament, there is no world law, and hey, guess what? Global challenges are intractable because we don't have the machinery to tackle them. So, whatever its weaknesses, Europe, as a number of Europeans here have pointed out, I guess I'm no longer a European, being British, at least politically, Europe leads the world in transnational governance, and so is uniquely well placed to lead development of the global governance we so urgently need. The key difference at the global level is that we have very powerful countries which are completely undemocratic. And effective governance of the environment, unfortunately, cannot wait for these powerful countries to democratize. So we have no choice but to do the best we can in the world as it is. So a colleague, Maya Groff, and I just convened an expert panel at COP27 in Egypt to discuss this problem. How do we create effective and accountable global governance of the environment urgently in the world as it is? We had a second meeting 3 days ago, and we have a third meeting scheduled for January. 5 people taking part in today's event. have been part of these discussions. We seek to establish clear principles to guide us, remain flexible on implementation, and then build a smart coalition of state and non-state actors to realise the governance reforms we need. This is what Bill Pace did. Shame we didn't hear from him earlier. But as we all know, this is what Bill Pace so successfully did with the coalition for the International Criminal Court. We are learning from what he did. The initiative is called Mobilising an Earth Governance Alliance, or using its initials, it's the MEGA project, or using its initials another way, Make Earth Great Again. We're not doing anything radically new. We're building on previous work, such as the Global Pact for the Environment. Now, Georgios, I was chatting to him last night, he's about to speak. He said to me last night, well, what about the other problems of the global commons? What about cyberspace and peace? I agree. The solution that Meg is proposing is general purpose. Parliament, expert advisory bodies, courts, the usual machinery of governance. So it's simply then a question of tactics. Which problem is bad enough to actually catalyse change? I'm thinking environment, but hey, whatever works. The most powerful approach, if we can all agree on the governance structures we want to build, would be a coalition of environment, peace, justice, and cyber movements, all pushing for a world parliament. Joe Leinen, I'm quoting you there from your article a year or two ago. So I invite you all to join this work. In particular, I invite the European Federalists to lead European engagement in this mega project so we can fix the environment and lay the foundation for a just, free, and peaceful world. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for outlining this project on the environmental crisis based on these principles of deliberation, enforcement, and accountability. And I love this acronym MEGA, which also can translate into Make Earth Great Again. And it also contrasts, of course, to this idea of nationalist populism, America, make America great again. So I think this, even here, it is touching on different dimensions. And of course, the European integration project started around strategically important resources strategically important for war, steel and coal. So it makes sense, and it has been discussed in Federalist circles for longer to identify subject issues, perhaps around which institution building can take place. And here we have the specific proposal that you are already working on to do this on the climate and environmental issue. And I'm sure if we had time to dig into this more, we would find overlaps and synergies to the proposal of the Green New Deal, but perhaps also to other proposals we are still to hear about, I think, namely from our next speaker who's on the list, Georgios Kostakos, who is co-founder and executive director of the Foundation for Global Governance and Sustainability, FOX, which is based right here in Brussels. Thank you for joining us. And one of the things I know you are working on is, of course, the Global Resilience Council. I don't know whether that's all you will talk about, perhaps not. But of course, we will be very interested in learning more about this. And being here at a panel that is dealing with the future of world federalism, I think we would all be very keen to understand how, in your perspective, this proposal, or perhaps others, relate to a world federalist strategy. And I would like to also ask, would you consider yourself a world federalist? You know, would you come out of the closet today in that regard, being on this panel? So
what if I come out?
The floor is yours.
Thank you, Andreas. Yeah, he didn't warn us about this. I don't know. What if I come out and I say I'm not a world federalist? Then you'll kill me probably. But
Yes.
yes, thank you. So I'll say this question has been asked before, like about my organization, whether we are members of the World Federalist Movement, and I said no. because not all the members of the board perhaps agree with this way of thinking about the world and the UN. We are, many of us, former UN staff members, and they want to leave it a bit open to see which way things are going. But of course, I'm here and I feel at home, and thank you for the invitation to be here. And to say about myself, I was the vice president of the European Federalist Party with Pietro De Matteis as president. I don't know if you've heard of it. We were also participating in the European elections in 2014, if I remember correctly, in 6 countries, where like some of the Volt people were with us at the time, right? Stand Up for Europe, we created a connection afterwards. So we have been working on this. With Daphne, I was her vice president for the European Demos project of Greek Federal here in Brussels. And now I'm also a member of UEF Greece that Daphne is leading as a vice president for now. So I'm committed to the European project because I think it can show the way for sure, and it has to improve itself, but I mean, it has achieved a lot. At the same time, at the world level, having studied UN reform myself and having worked at the UN, I am a bit cautious, especially in the climate that sometimes this discussion takes place in Europe. So that's why I think we have to keep the two distinct. I'll tell you why. When I was at the UN, Kofi Annan's office, and in Ban Ki-moon's office, among other things that I did for the UN, you could see there that it was a European or Western organization. So other countries, including Russia and China, and certainly the developing countries, either felt that they were guests, like, okay, have the token Russian here, the token Chinese in the office of the SG, but they didn't really participate in the deep discussions. They were there, oh, the Secretary General wants to send a message to Mr. Putin, so let's use our Russian colleague, whom we keep out for many other discussions about real UN reform. So the ownership is with the West, or the West tries to do it and others see it, and the others feel it's guests, or they feel as clients. Like many developing countries come in and they say, what about more development assistance for the UN? 0.7, 1%, spending their time to negotiate with, again, the West that controls the financial system to get more resources, but not trying to mobilize their own resources, not really achieving much, because even when the money is given, it goes to consultants from the West, and there is no remaining value or a lot of added value at the local level. That's my concern about development assistance as we see it often. So how to make the rest of the world co-owners of this? Then you can have world federalism, maybe. I mean, you can call it federalism or not, but then it would be a much more representative system that, in addition to having inclusivity and deliberations, it also delivers for everybody the SDGs. We have the framework what we want to achieve, and the Green Deal and more. Also social issues, delivers health, delivers all the SDGs basically. There is accountability and there is rule of law without insisting on only the form of democracy that we know in the West. And I liked what John said now, and Maya, who are working to see what they can do with the current system, because there are good and bad ways of working with the current system. And I was happy to see that in China, there were protests against this COVID, whatever, zero COVID policy, and that there was a response from the government. So, I mean, there are ways of working with the current system also. Nobody's perfect. There can be improvements. We may think our system is the best. I'm from Sparta. I'm not from Athens, so I have my reservations. But I'm more for the assemblies that you choose people perhaps like this, and everybody could do their job like that as representatives. So there are things that can work, and we should make them work. And we should not only insist on a Green Deal, because green for some people is mainly the environment and pollution. And who created most of the pollution and who damaged the climate most? The West and the North, the industrial countries. Now the same countries come back and say, we used it, we became the dominant powers because of that. Now we have another plan how to save the world from it, and we will be again the dominant powers because you will follow our financial rules and you will do what we say, like keeping the Amazon, not developing yourselves, buying our own new technologies. So let's look at this, the double standards and how others perceive it, to be a bit more sophisticated, like Monica said, And another thing on this, and then I'll go to the Global Resilience Council very briefly. When I was at the European Greens Congress in Copenhagen a few days ago, since we shared the same party there, we were talking about Ukraine and how the West can win over the developing countries that are abstaining and they don't vote against Russia in the General Assembly of the UN by saying to them, okay, you have to speak against the aggression. We understand that we have done bad things to you, so we acknowledge colonialism and its impacts. But acknowledging only colonialism and not redressing it are two different things. So we had a big discussion in Copenhagen and we put the redressing also in it. And what I would also say, we should think about ways out and allow ways out, like we allowed the Americans to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan with face-saving measures, while they also made a mess and they also tried the regime change that never succeeds from outside, in my view. So let's be more realistic and practical, and we'll save the world from more wars and I think less misunderstandings. And here comes our innovation for global governance. And this is the Global Resilience Council. We think that a council that basically looks like the Security Council but has no veto and replaces gradually the Security Council, because the issues we should be talking about and addressing this world are the climate crisis, the crisis of food insecurity, the health crisis, and also the crisis of inequality, the crisis of the problematic allocation of resources and their use. So, I mean, these things are human security challenges, and we should make them work, and Europe should have a key role in promoting this kind of global challenges mechanisms, and not trying Germany still to become permanent member of the Security Council, Italy trying to stop it in the past, all these things that don't help because they are the bad old ways. So yes, drastic rethinking, mega projects and approach, but a lot more sophisticated, I would say, if I may say so. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Georgios. You have made a case for including developing countries better in our thinking, which I think is very useful. And you also mentioned the SDGs, which I think hasn't been done before today, or at least I don't remember, which is also an important framework, of course, in general sense for the international community as a goal. And many of the goals, it appears, will not be achieved in the current, if we extrapolate in the current situation. You also voiced sympathy for the approach as an immediate next step, that we also need to attempt to work inside, with the current system. Like John previously mentioned, that the mega project cannot wait until countries become democratic. How can we solve CO2 emission issues, for instance, without China? That is a quite obvious thing that we can also note. Our next speaker is Pablo Gomez de Mayora. He's a veterinary doctor specialized in One Health and the integrated management of health risks in the Global South. So I believe that perhaps Pablo has also in his thinking embraced the perspective of developing countries in the Global South. And I understand that, Pablo, that you will try to compare the situation when the Montreux Declaration was adopted, the situation at that time, with today's complex crisis. And we are keen to hear about this. You have the floor.
All right, thank you very much. Well, I will start my presentation, as many have before me, with the Montreux Declaration. We can pass the slide. Yep, there we go. So, I'm sorry, how should we do this? Should I just tell you when to pass the slides, or is that okay? All right, apologies. So, 75 years have passed since the Montreux Declaration, and we are still facing some of the same issues that were raised in the very same declaration. Next slide. And then we click again. So, for starters, we have the threat of a global conflict menacing us again. And we also have talks about nuclear weapons and mass destruction back in our journals. On top of that, as we have mentioned, we have a UN Security Council with 5 permanent members that have veto power. This prevents the UN from being democratic and also from defending human rights in cases such as what we're seeing right now in Ukraine. On top of this, we have new challenges that we have just mentioned, such as climate change, which has the potential to basically wipe us off the face of this earth. The biodiversity crisis, which some have called the 6th mass extinction, that to it, and then how these two major crises bind up with increasing the potential of new pandemics arising, such as the one that we have just seen with COVID-19. So as we have just seen, old issues, new issues, and on top of that, this is a polycrisis. Polycrisis doesn't just mean that these issues add to each other, it's also the links that are between them that give us an even more negative effect, such as what we have just mentioned. For example, global warming has an impact on biodiversity. Loss of biodiversity also has an impact on how the world is warming up. And then both of these factors have an impact on the likelihood of new pandemics developing. So, I just mentioned a bunch of, wait, sorry. So, I just mentioned some global threats. The title of this talk was supposed to be about challenges to federalism. And the way I see it, these global threats should not be a challenge to federalism, but rather an opportunity, because they make it obvious why a federal system and why putting resources together is a good idea. So I'm going to try and attempt to answer to the question to why, if it's so obvious that we need to federalize, we are currently struggling. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I think that some of the factors are, for starters, post-truth. Post-truth is different from lying in the way that it can be more classified as a kind of philosophical posture in regards to truth. You don't consider truth as based on facts. You're not talking about factual things anymore. You're talking about consensus. You're identifying truth with opinions, and that can be manipulated. Or as someone else put it, alternative facts. There we go. So we cannot credit him alone with coming up with this post-truth, but surely the amount of this information that he has spread and with how often he has done it, has clearly made this mainstream, and it's permeating a lot of governments around the globe. Degrading democracy, delegitimizing science, which also draws us back from projecting the importance of the global threats that we mentioned at the beginning, and driving societal polarization, as we have mentioned previously. So on top of this post-truth, we also have the challenge of social media. Social media is just a tool. It's not bad in itself, but it's giving the potential to this disinformation, this post-truth, to spread further away by either the creation of echo chambers, which is basically when I get to select which information I'm exposed to, and I make the choice to place myself in the online spaces where the information that is agreeable to me is more often shown. And then we have And then we have the filter bubble, which is a result of how the social media is monetized, which is basically based on the amount of time that I spend behind the screen. And it so happens that the kind of content, the material that makes us you keep stuck behind the screen is often the most polarizing. Let us not forget that this is not just an issue in regards to federalism. It can also be weaponized, as it has been and as it currently is, with the so-called troll farms. On top of this, we also have youth disengagement with democracy and politics. This is caused by, okay, there we go. This goes by this narrative, this sensation of not having a future anymore, linked to eco-anxiety, to the prospect of having worse economic status than the present generation, and the general distrust towards institutions, towards governments, towards what is official, which also feeds back into what we were talking about with disinformation and the problem of social media. Okay, so up until now, we have seen global threats, so a global public crisis, which can also be seen as an opportunity, because, as we said, it's an incentive for an integrative process of federalization. We have also seen how social media can have deleterious effects with polarization, undermining democracy, but it's also a proof that it's a valuable tool for the spreading of ideas, for the creation of communities, and it can be capitalized upon by us, Federalists. And lastly, we have seen how the youth is disenchanted with the current situation, but that can also be seen as the youth looking for a cause, and that is something that we can provide. We have a large availability of causes, and I believe that it's of the utmost relevance. So basically, the Young World Federalists, which is the organization that we both belong to, me and Jorge, are trying to work on that aspect, doing this outreach, this sort of education of a sort, to try and take the floor, basically. We currently, within the youth and also within a lot of online spaces, we're not creating a narrative, we're not having our voice heard. We just need to kickstart a conversation in order for these ideas to become more popular, and that's what we're trying to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pablo, for this presentation. I found it very useful and interesting for our general framework of thinking today, that you introduced some of these root causes, or perhaps also trends related to autocratization and polarization, which means this phenomenon of post-truth and alternative facts that's being used in connection with nationalist populism. But that you also pointed out the double nature, for instance, of social media, which on the one hand, for a long time was thought to be a factor of democratization and dissemination of information, but has been twisted into a tool actually to serve misinformation, the post-truth era, and so on. But you also said this double nature persists, which means that it is also still, that's what I understood, an opportunity really for World Federalists to reach an audience, particularly the youth, which you mentioned, since from your perspective, there is a gap here, and youth is looking for a cause. So perhaps the Young World Federalists can actually offer this. And Pablo actually is one of the new generation. You mentioned the Young World Federalists now, who are taking up a World Federalism from this new perspective, from the youth perspective. There hasn't been a youth organization at WFM for a long time. I believe ages ago there existed one, but that's something for the historians to look into. We have now a new one that is active, and Pablo has been involved in its establishment. And just as our next speaker, who will Jorge Manilos, who studied a bachelor's degree on philosophy, politics, and economics in Madrid, Barcelona, and Paris. And you are currently pursuing a master's degree on diplomacy, I understand, international relations, security, and defense. So you are also here in the European Parliament working with Dominic. So you are at the center, so to speak, of the European Federalist action in this house together with Dominic. So this is for sure a very interesting perspective, and that's why we are very interested in hearing from you about your understanding where are the opportunities and challenges and perhaps the priorities of World Federalist action. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Andreas. And first of all, I wanted to thank UEF, the World Federalist Movement, for organizing this event. And I wanted to personalize a little bit in Daphne, because only she knows how much effort she's put to make the 75th anniversary, which had to happen, come true. So thank you once again, and it's been a pleasure to work with you. I really feel honored to be sitting with these panelists because I've been reading his books. I have attended the meetings, so for me it is personally a very good experience to be here with you. Pablo has talked about the challenges and how those challenges can be opportunity for youth to capitalize them and for push a little bit more for World Federalism. I'm going to talk about the Young World Federalist as such. I'm going to go through the history of the Young World Federalist within the World Federalist movement, and I'm going to look into the main challenges that we face and the ways forward that I see that can be better for us. So that's what I put there. And well, when we think about the organization of the Young World Federalist, it's not only about the Young World Federalist as an organization, but also as Young European Federalists, who also knows it as Vice President, support World Federalism. However, it is not maybe the ideal coherent structure that we could think. It's been more ad hoc. It really depends on the human resources, on the economic resources that you have, on the political context. That's why the history of these organizations have not been a line going up, but actually a bumpy road. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the case of the Young European Federalists, but then I will also focus on the Young World Federalists because it's relevant to understand where we are now and possible way forward. So I put there that the Young European Federalists had their first office in Paris in 1949, and they closed very soon because there was a division in UEF. As you all know, the organization, the adult organization, was divided, and the European structure of the Young European Federalists disappeared for a while, because then in 1972 it was again regathered and reestablished. In the 60s, and this is what led to this reestablishment of the European level, there were several events happening as an answer to the political developments that were affecting Europe. So the Young European Federalists were reestablished. Then in 1972, it was established, and now they have more than 15,000 members. They are doing very well. They have been a key actor in the Conference on the Future of Europe, and they are really an example for young organizations, youth organizations. So now, looking into our history, the Young World Federalists, there were actually organizations who represented what we are now with different names. In the 40s, they were called the World Student Federalists. Then in 1953, they changed the name. They were called the Young World Federalists, as we are now. Then in 1959, they were included within the organization, what today is the World Federalist Movement, which was called the World Organization of World Federalists, and they were the Youth and Student Division, which is interesting to know because that's something that we have considered, and we still need to think about the implications the advantages, disadvantages, and of course, if it would be possible. Then in 1968, they became independent, and they were called the World Federalist Youth. And by the late 70s, they said goodbye for a while, because then, and quite unexpectedly, I guess, from a Reddit server, which was created, among others, by Pablo, they started talking about global issues, and they realized that there was an association missing, an association of young Federalists who gathered together to push for these objectives. This happened in 2019. And please, Alexandra. Yeah, we shouldn't expect the ideal, be coherent structures of having the World Organization, organizations in every continent, because we don't have those resources. I put the example of a pyramid which is to be constructed. We are still just with the first stones, but good things are happening. Here I put a picture of last year. I had the opportunity to participate in the Week for World Parliament in Berlin. Then this year we kept working, and we managed to organize different events in Nairobi, then also in New York and in Brussels. Pablo was the organizer of that event, which was very good. Isabella, she also participated, she's here. And it's not only about physical events, because as I will tell you later, that's one of the problems that we have. We also, our main activity is online. And here I put that it is actually one of our strengths, because we are young and we know how to use these new technologies, so we can do quite fancy things. As you see, we talk about Gary Davis, as probably the movement has been doing, but in a different way, updated to the new generation. We talk about the new political developments. For instance, at the beginning of the Russian aggression, there was a movement which might continue today, which is white and blue, calling for a democratic Russia. So why are the young World Federalists, or why is this association relevant? Well, because youth is a different niche, and sometimes the World Federalist movement without a young organization might find difficult to be attractive to get them involved in supporting these ideas, which are fundamental, of course. And that's why I think it's very important for our organization to exist and to work well. Now, okay, it's great, we exist, but we have huge challenges. This panel, as you know, is about thinking about them. So the three main challenges that we have, and I'm open to suggestions and ideas to cope with them, is first, we lack resources. We have a huge lack of resources. We don't have a secretariat. For instance, the Young European Federalists, they have a big secretariat with lots of people working and being paid to make the organization work, and that's key for a youth organization. So that's the biggest, I think, and first problem that we have. Then fragmentation. As our scope is the world, we have people in Africa, in many different countries. We have people in Asia, but Asia is huge, and in Europe, but it's hard to get them together physically. And that's another problem that we have. And that's why we are mainly online based. And that's why also in the Week for World Parliament, we try to make this effort to gather together physically, because it is way better, as you all know, and this is the reason why we are also doing this event. And then the lack of a structure, because yes, we exist, we have our bylaws, and we legally exist, but we still lack a lot of structure, because we lack leadership of people willing to participate. It's many people, when we talk to them, say that this is too idealistic, that it's better to focus, if you're in Europe, on European federalism. I understand it, but there has to be also people working on these ideas, and I personally, I'm leaning towards that, because I think there is a big need for that. And yeah, so those are our main three problems. I have tried to give an answer to each of those, and we can maybe, if not now in the dinner or later, we can comment on those. So to tackle the first problem, I think we have a great opportunity. The European Commission has presented its Youth Action Plan regarding its external action, which goes from 2022 until 2027. It gives funds for youth organizations to promote democracy and political involvement of youth, not only in Europe, but also outside. So I sent an email the other day to Camila, for instance, to say, hey, maybe this can be interesting for Democracia Global, or this can be interesting for people in Africa who are also federalists, who support, for instance, the Eastern Bloc, which is also uniting politically in Africa. So that for the first problem. Then regarding fragmentation, I propose being patient. So we have just started. When we talk about the young European Federalists, yes, they were reestablished at the European level in 1972, but they've been working since the 40s. We are very young as an organization, and even if we existed before, we were not us who existed, and we still have a lot to do, and we have to be patient, and I think have this long-term mindset. And I think the way forward, yes, we are fragmented, but we can start connecting people. Every day, there are people coming into our Discord server where there are thousands of people, and they are from all over the world. So I was proposing also Camila and Democracia Global, hey, we'll send you the young federalists who are from Latin America, so that maybe you can start creating groups, and if 10 people are gathered in Colombia, it would be great, so that they can start organizing things. So I think that's something we can do, and also, even if we are fragmented, we can do a lot of things online to widespread the ideas. Right now, our videos on YouTube hardly get to 100 views, and if we get to get better in communicating our ideas, which are great, our ideas are really great. If we are better in selling, they can have way more impact. And then regarding the structure, I think GF has to be the reference for us because they have learned through experience from 4 decades. And I think that's the way forward. And I was also thinking not only copying the GF structures on us, but also about one day maybe becoming the umbrella organization for other young associations, which might not be the Young World Federalist Africa, but ICOYACA, for instance, who is a youth association working to promote the Free Trade African Agreement, which is also a federal step if we want to see it that way. So that was all I wanted to talk to you about. I'm open for ideas. Pablo, Isabel, and me will be more than happy to hear what you can maybe say, propose, so that we can strengthen the Young World Federalist and thus strengthen the World Federalist movement as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, for me, the question, why is a youth organization relevant, doesn't even pose itself. Of course, it is relevant, but it is good that you have thought these questions through and also these challenges at a very practical level indeed. I guess some of these challenges are shared by all Federalist organizations to a degree, but of course, as a new endeavor, you are impacted in a very tangible way. For instance, lack of resources is certainly something that many groups are dealing with in the wider Federalist family, and it is great that you already have ideas how to address this in a very specific way. I think it's interesting also that you introduce this long-term vision of the Young World Federalists becoming a global umbrella organization of youth organizations with the same, mission of federalism, perhaps. That is, I think, very interesting, and I also think that you are developing the right mindset, because the UN reform subject and actually creating a world federation requires patience indeed. Right? So I'm so happy that we have the new young generation here also represented at the panel. And I think we have come to the end of the list of panelists. We, I believe, still have time to address questions. And is that true? Maybe check first. Oh, doesn't look good.
You can take 5 minutes.
Well, let's check whether there are even questions. Maybe, since this has been a long day, people first would have to have a break. So, but maybe there's something urgent. Yes, please.
Thank you very much. Urgent, indeed, I suppose. Now I had a question, which is a very concrete one. Somebody mentioned the issue of the Mercosur agreement, which has been on ice for EU-Mercosur agreement on ice for 15 years or so, I believe. Now, my very open question. I'm here to learn, right? Is what should be done, what could be done on either side of the agreement so that the trade agreement can make progress without anybody renouncing, I suppose, you know, what we Federalists stand for, which is global governance, sustainable development. I don't know. I'm not an expert, so I'm putting the question to the experts. I know it's a tricky one, but I'm very open. What can the Federalists do to help, you know, with this broad and rich understanding of the balance of interests, sophisticated approach?
Well, to recap, I mean, your question specifically addresses the EU-Mercosur agreement, right?
Yes.
So which refers back to the previous panel, not this one. Unless somebody on this panel would think they have expertise on the subject, I would have to call on Fernando, who has raising this over there. But I'm not sure whether this is the right context because it was part of the previous panel.
You
right?
mean the introduction?
Sorry?
The introduction, you mean? Because this was not the topic of the previous panel. Panel 1 did not deal with this.
Oh, then,
but,
well, it was, at least it wasn't this panel, but I mean.
Yes, I know. Maybe.
Right, at the opening debate even, yes. Well, but Fernando, yes, you can talk perhaps bilaterally also, or. Yes, that's fantastic. I mean, that's the point, right? That you get a response to your question, and he's offering it to give it to you. So that would be fine, I guess. So also I need to have a look at those participating online. But I don't see somebody raising their hand. So I guess if there's anyone on the panel who would like to make some remark, a final one, that is not the case, then I believe we can close this session. Thank you very much to these great panelists and their. We will meet again when? Okay, so 5 minutes here, I believe.
You did speak about the details with your Green Deal. Thank you for telling me. That's a big question. It is a big question. I don't expect 10 minutes you can just this is we have to discuss and Giorgio, you do have the time to it could be part of the mega project. Yeah, of course. It occurred to me suddenly that would be fun to us. But of course, I consider you might not think it's fun, you know. So. I can find it. Okay, good. Otherwise, I don't want to say. Yes, I'm glad you feel comfortable. It was, yes, a nice way to start, I think. Yeah. Thanks, we can hear even the financial commons as part of the mega project because this is it about the financial commons in a way, like use of currencies in the financial system is sort of a commons that delivers or not for everybody. So yeah, that's another thing that would, because there is a business.
I have some proposal, but the reform is the reform of the International Monetary Fund. It is, I started from the idea of the special.
Hi, Amy, great to see you also.
Hi, Andrew.
Hello.
Hi. How are you doing?
Fantastic that you can participate.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Good to see you. Great job.
Good to see you too. And perhaps you can say something later. I hope so. That I think everybody would very much appreciate.
Absolutely.
Great. So talk to you soon.
Yes, indeed.
They approve only the idea, but they impose to the International Monetary Fund, so they, in the statute of the International Monetary Fund today, there is the special drawing right. Yes. But the United States opposed to the utilization of the euro because why?
Yes,
Because if you utilize a special drawing right, you don't utilize the dollar. So the dollar should not be again
There should be one currency with a special
I'm
drawing.
not going to debate with you. There's the thing with World Federalism. I don't want to avoid technicalities. I am not an economist. I went to finance.
To clarify this kind of question, you should enter into much technical detail.
The City of London said no.
No,
this is really volunteering. The City of London.
Yes, yes.
Because I mean, there's comment about what I'm doing here.
The City of London
I mean, obviously you're invited for your
The City of London was against the value
One of the
So the fact there's lack of sophistication here is because you haven't been to the meetings.
Sorry for insisting on the sophistication.
We were inviting experts, and
They don't really speak
I'm
of
not
it.
expert.
But who is the expert? Global war expert.
You're doing it as well tonight?
Are you going to have dinner tonight, first of all? Then with us.
I don't know, because I have my family in Bruxelles, so I have to join. It is the last night with my
Granddaughter?
little daughters.
Yes.
I have two little daughters here.
Well, have a nice evening with that. Make a nice break from.
Yeah, you have a dinner tonight.
I believe there's a dinner.
Yes,
for,
I think so. You can ask or
No,
Jorge.
I am sorry, I didn't know that, but I promised to go to say bye-bye because tomorrow morning we have a flight to go back to it.
If you think there's still time, yeah, we can ask them.
No, but I say that in order to discuss this kind of problem, like the monetary reform of the world, you should have time to explain, to enter into technical details. Because
if you're going to discuss monetary reform at a global level, you don't yet want an audience of general world federalists because I haven't got a clue what you're talking about. You need a bunch.
yeah, you know, but that is my job was to teach this kind of problem for all in my. I made my lecture in the university where divided European integration and world integration. So I try to show how the two processes are one phases of the.
I'll give you an example of the World Federalist movement support for the proposal. Is if you look at EcoSide and International Court for the Environment, they're not the same proposal. And the World Federalist movement isn't consisting entirely of environmental lawyers. So I wouldn't choose between them. If someone wants to push EcoSide, great. If someone wants to push International Court for the Environment, great. And whoever gets traction.
So John, to this discussion, I would like to propose to have end of January probably a discussion focus on this. Follow up on what we do in the area of
Something more practical.
and then of course we will see. Once
WFM.
yes, so a group of friends, 10 people that they would like first to share basic information, background information, and then to have a kind of short agenda with 2 or 3 thematic issues. The main problem I can see with this global governance on the environment is the funding at the EU level. Once we start discussing this, I feel lost myself after 30 years experience.
So
What
I
it
run
will be
into
the
this
funding?
whenever you have a conversation with the UN, coalition for the UN, you always get this, well, it's not practical. And I have come to not care what's practical, because if you do what is practical and it doesn't work, you wasted your time. If you can come up with something that will work, then fight for it. And you wait for the
Daphne was saying, I think
My
it's
point
different.
is different. For instance, the International Criminal Court, we have an ongoing proposal on environmental crime. The international dimension is not the key, but we have due diligence proposals for corporations, including some. We have UN negotiations on the same issue. So it would be easier to imagine a project dealing, proposing this. Well, why not to extend at the first step or something more global? As practically sure that my DG will not find something global on environmental
that's not
governance.
I mean,
So
to me, that
then
tells
we
me
have to go to DG Environment.
But
It
I'm
doesn't
not.
cover the external.
I'm not going through the exercise of looking at the funders and
okay.
finding what they are going to fund that I could do. I'm going through the exercise of saying we have a critical environmental problem that is going to potentially go catastrophic. What needs to be done?
Yeah.
And then there's
But
Milton
I
Friedman's
think,
quote that you need to
John, I
calculate.
think that we should discuss with time and calm this kind of technical problem in order to enter into the difficult.
This is what I was saying to George earlier. I agree.
Yes, you know, because of course he is right in saying that there is a kind of neglect concerning the emerging countries. The emerging.
I mean, this
The majority of humanity.
This is serious. It's huge problem.
Yeah, that is a huge problem.
Lots of damage.
And
Exactly.
but
That was something positive.
Yeah. When I
Let's
talk-
see the money.
Let's see the
Show me
money.
the money.
Exactly.
and when I talk about the monetary reform, I was thinking about this kind of problem, but not you don't see the link immediately.
Also,
selfish.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you know, the problem is that there is a link, but it's not immediately for, let me say, the young people or people in the street and so on. The link is the debt, because the money is the foundation of finance. Without money, you don't have a financial system. It is impossible, but you have to have the money.
But if you own the
And
money,
if you control the money, you
control.
control the financial system. That is the problem why the dollar is so strong sometimes, and the United States. Take an example. If you export in you are of the euro area, you have the euro.
Germany gets cheap exports.
No, but let's forget Germany.
they give us loans
Yeah,
to buy their own
let
goods.
me say, take a national money for anywhere. What do you think? Euro is, from a certain point of view, a national money for the euro area.
Yeah. Hey, how about those stones out on the island?
But when you have a European exporter, the problem is that even today there is a quantity, for instance, oil that you have to pay in dollar. Even if
With the
you,
euro,
even so, the country who control the dollar exchange with the euro has an advantage. The multinational enterprises can export in their currency, so they don't have the risk of change. For the international currency like Amazon and so on, the world is the market. For the European enterprise, for the European firm, the European market is little, but it is only European. If you export outside Europe, you have to utilize the dollar for center goods and for center goods. Now it is too simple.
But commodities, many of them are still.
So the problem is that in such a case, the United States has an enormous control of the world economy.
Yeah, but I'm not going to get my head around special drawing rights.
Sit next to me for dinner.
So, no, for instance, if you
There must be an online course. Next time you see him,
take the question of sanctions, for instance, the United States opposes any payment in dollar with Iran. So Iran is
cut off from the financial
system. It's catastrophe. So you.
But the European
very strong weapons.
Yeah. So the Chinese move into that space.
And the Europeans have tried. That is the reason why China is trying to have with Russia and Brazil
The BRICS.
The BRICS.
Yeah, I mean,
To organize
this whole national sovereignty,
an
we're
alternative,
building blocks
to organize
mentality
an
is
alternative
But it's the
country.
West. The West is a big culprit of
Oh,
that too.
I couldn't agree more.
Primary
China is
beneficiary
trying
is
to
the West.
organize another international.
Yeah, I'm
If you
open
put
to
it on
persuasion,
those terms.
but I give you a question, very quick question.
Yes.
Do you believe that effective and tangible governance of the environment is necessary?
Of the environment, I don't see the separate environment.
Sorry?
I don't see the environment as a separate thing. So I don't think it would solve anything if you focus only on the environment. Because the environment is industrial policies, financial sector, it's human. Yeah, of course.
That's what you were saying. Yeah, yes. So, okay, so that was the
We
point.
agree, yes.
The point is that really parliamentary bodies address
All of the issues, yeah. But the parliamentary
Abadal as well. He's saying.
He's also taught us about environment.
Okay, but he's saying you need a top-level coordinating body, not some overarching black massive. I'm just curious because I mean,
Let's come. I think we're no longer on the podium, right? To leave some space.
I don't disagree with anything.
In former times, we had MEPs from all sources.
I see I'm actually on the screen, but I guess.
Our body is.
Yes.
Hope that I saw. Hi, Domenico. I hope that Kennedy is also online.
Yes, he is.
So let's start the last panel. And the last panel will focus on basically on the transnational working group we have created in February this year, dealing with the improvement of cooperation between African and European Federalists, but at the same time we have the pleasure to have Federalists from Asia, India. So the moderator, it's Ami, it's the executive director of the World Federalist Movement, a person who worked hard for this event. I would like to thank Ami personally and Luis for the World Federalist Movement in particular, because I don't know how many messages we have exchanged per day for this event. And Ami, the floor is yours for moderating this last panel. Thanks.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, Daphne. I hope you can all hear me. Thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay, great. So it's a pleasure to be here with you all today, celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Montreux Declaration and what is undoubtedly a very crucial time. While I'm very sorry to not be there with you in person today, I'm very pleased to introduce the final panel that will be talking about UEF and WFM cooperation. So as Daphne mentioned, earlier this year, the WFM launched the Transnational Working Group on African Union and European Union relations as an opportunity to promote discourse around policy issues affecting both continents and to suggest coordinated responses to these issues, bearing in mind, of course, the globalized nature of today's world. So some of the speakers on this panel will expound on that a little more. And without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Domenico Moro, who is one of the facilitators of the Transnational Working Group. So Domenico is currently a member of the UEF and MFE Federal Committee and of the WFM Council. He's also a member of the board of the Centro Studi sul Federalismo in Turin and of the Luciano Bollis Foundation. He was vice president of the MFE and director of the Institute of Federalist Studies in Ventotene. And today, Domenico will talk about some of the work of the Transnational Working Group on AU-EU relations and the inspiration behind some of the working group streams. So over to you, Domenico.
Thanks, Amy, for this. It's not a very easy task, but in any case, WFM cooperation. I think that this transnational working group is the unique, the sole example of cooperation between the UF and WFM, mainly due to the proposal of Daphne Gugu at the beginning of this year that has supported the idea of setting up this working group on African and European Union relations. What is the rationale, about the transnational working group on Africa and Europe relation? I think that the rationale lies in what has been on two statements. One statement by the European Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni at the beginning of this month in Rome, and secondly by the statement of our President, Fernando Iglesias, of this afternoon. Paolo Gentiloni, attending a meeting on Euromed relations, stated that the relations with the Mediterranean and African countries represent the future of the European Union. From his part, the President, Fernando Iglesias, stated this afternoon that the WFM support the regional integration. That said, in any case, I believe that the problem is to identify, in my opinion, more precisely the areas in which this relationship can be developed in order to understand whether a political initiative involving both UF and the WFM can arise from this relation, this idea of supporting the cooperation between European Union and African Union. I believe that this policy can be jointly promoted between EU and that can be promoted by European Union and African Union concern mainly the security policy and the sustainable development policy. Why security policy? The countries of African Union during the last decade, more or less, have signed many treaties concerning the economic and monetary unification, and more recently, the treaty concerning the establishment of a free trade area. But these treaties have never been ratified by all the African countries, and therefore can enter into force. What is the reason? The countries that have not ratified the various treaties are those mainly involved in local wars or civil wars. This means, and the European experience itself proves, this means that internal security and peaceful relations between African states is a decisive condition for the African continent to gradually move towards its own unification. And on this field, I think that European Union and African Union can collaborate for a reciprocal interest. Why the sustainable development policy? An important indication on this issue comes from the content of the declaration of the Finance Minister of Africa following the meeting with the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa that met in the 1st October 2021 in Addis Ababa. African ministers seized the opportunity to call for the establishment of a global price on carbon as a means to collect resources for the African development. For his part, MEP Brando Benifei, speaking at the Turin conference that held in 22-23 October of this year, pointed out that the African continent can be the first continent on a global scale to pursue the goal of its development without the use of energy from fossil sources. Obviously, this goal can be attained through a strict collaboration between European Union and African Union, and above all, with an investment plan on this renewable resources that financed by the European, probably not only by the European Union, but on a world scale. Financed not by the euro, not by a national currency, but the world currency, such as the special drawing rights. I think that in this case, obviously the idea of fixing a world price of carbon can be attained through a transitional phase. This transitional phase could be the carbon border adjustment mechanism introduced both by European Union and the African Union. It is true that, as has been said this afternoon, that the European Union account only for 8% of the global emission of carbon dioxide, and African continent obviously probably 2-3% or less. But what, in my opinion, is important is that European Union and African Union together are a quarter of the world population. This is an indication, in my opinion, more important, that could give an important direction to the rest of the world about the creation of a carbon of a global price of carbon. In any case, for this set of reasons, this year has been started a number of initiatives in order to establish some link with youth African or African parliamentary members. We have organized mainly two initiatives. The first one has been organized the 9th of February of this year, just before the meeting of European Union and African Union. And the other one has been organized in the October, last October. The title of this initiative, last initiative, has been African European Youth Conference, Designing a Youth Inclusive Future for Africans and Europeans. These two initiatives have been a success. In the first case, the initiative has been attended by more or less 40-50 people. But the second initiative has been attended by 250 people, European and African, directly, and more or less 50-60 people by online. The idea is to organize another event the next year on the issue of sustainable development. I already have some contact with the parliamentary of the South Africa, that is also a member of the Pan-African Parliament, and also with the parliamentary of Gambia, that is also member of the Pan-African Assembly, in order to organize online this event. Why, in order to conclude, why, according to me, is important insist on this issue of Europe and Africa relation? Because the European Union has a very strong interest toward toward the collaboration with African Union, not only for security reason, but in my opinion, but above all, in my opinion, because without the involvement of African Union, for the European Union will be impossible to attain the goal of a carbon-free economy in 2050. Then I think that probably a political initiative on this field could be the introduction of a Euro-African carbon border adjustment mechanism. If it's true, I think that a Euro-African initiative could be also a means for the WFM to find resources for its initiative. That is what I mean. When Federalists launched the campaign for the International Criminal Court, the main financial sources for this initiative came from the European Union, the European Commission and European government and some European foundation. Then I think that a Euro-African initiative could be also a means for the WFM to find some financial resources for its initiative. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you very much for your insight and for your contribution, Domenico. Up next, we have Ms. Chimita Patanaik, who has a PhD in environmental biotechnology and currently works as a postdoctoral fellow. So her research is focused on coastal ocean carbon monitoring and CO2 sequestration. She's been published widely in peer-reviewed international journals and many popular articles, two of which have been published in the Federalist debate. She's actively involved in many advocacy campaigns for global unification, such as the UNPA, and she also serves as a youth climate ambassador. So Ms. Chimita will be talking about how UEF and WFM can move together towards the vision of establishing a world federal government, in particular as it pertains to the campaign for the establishment of a World Environment Authority. So over to you, Ms. Chimita.
Thank you very much, Amy. Good evening, all of you. It's my pleasure to have all of you here in the European Parliament to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Montreux Declaration. In 1947, the World Federalists met together in Montreux, Switzerland, to pursue the establishment of the World Federal Government for sustained peace. In 1997, UEF and WFM, World Federalist Movement, held a joint World Congress in Montreux, and 3 of our South Asian Federalists participated in this historic 50th anniversary. Here, we are gathered today celebrating the 75th anniversary of Montreux Declaration, reflecting on how far our efforts on establishing the World Federal Government have yielded fruits, and in light of it, planning the way forward. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to represent Asia here. Union of European Federalists is certainly an integral part of WFM as other member organizations. Union of European Federalists demonstrated how a miniature model of the world federal government could work at the regional level, with the work of European Union being a supranational institution with the support of the Spinelli Group in the European Parliament. It's very difficult to even dream of establishing a world federal government unless you are a part of larger group. Being a part of WFM, the global vision of the establishment of the world federal government for UEF still remains. I was a Center for United Nations Constitutional Research delegate to attend the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change Conference, COP27, held in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, to combat climate change. There we advocated for climate democracy and giving the right to youth to vote at COP. I can visualize how European Federalists and World Federalists would approach climate change issues together effectively. Keeping the motto of world peace through world law, WFM and UEF could promote a campaign for the establishment of the World Environment Authority. I see a reference to cooperation with Africa in agenda. Asia also needs to be supported, where 2/3 of the world population and majority of the world's poor live. Many of us have benefited from the International Federalist Seminar organized every year at Ventotin by UEF. UEF should promote similar training grounds for young professionals in order to strengthen Asian and SAARC as vibrant regional blocs. I firmly believe strong regional bodies would enhance the promotion of the world federal government, and European Union has shown us the way. WFM and UEF could jointly continue to promote the world federal government, and governance of climate change is the existential arena to do this. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us, Suchimita. Your topic is indeed very relevant, and you share some very interesting ideas that I would personally like to follow up on. I'm now pleased to introduce Juuso Kavaniemi, who's originally from Finland. So Juuso has acted as the Vice President of the Young European Federalists, or JEF Europe, since 2021. Within the JEF Europe board, he's concerned with world federalism and health, among other policy topics. So Juuso studied international relations at the University of Edinburgh and European political and governance studies at the College of Europe in Bruges. Today, Juuso will discuss the importance of European federalists and world federalists working together, and he will articulate visions for a better world to which Europe can make its own contribution. He'll also share reflections of world federalism within Africa. So without further ado, Juuso, over to you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, thank you so much to Daphne, to everyone else who made the effort of organizing this event. It is indeed crucial that we have this moment to celebrate the Montreux Declaration and to discuss the cooperation between European and world federalists. This year is not only the 75th anniversary of the Montreux Declaration, it is also the 50th anniversary of JEF Europe in its current format. We have celebrated throughout the year, and as a part of that, we have asked our members, where do you see JEF in 50 years? One of the most common answers that we have received is that we hope that in 50 years, JEF doesn't need to be there to advocate for a European federation because we are already living in one. But that then raises the question, if we have a European federation, what do we then need to advocate for? And the answer is pretty obvious. It's a world federation. European integration, of course, is just a stepping stone towards something bigger. This is something that European federalists have understood for decades. This is something that comes through from the Montreux Declaration itself. Now we are living through global challenges. This is something that we have been discussing here throughout the day. There's no need to repeat much about the crucial importance of tackling climate change at the global level. Other challenges, international security, global health crises that we have mentioned. So it is obvious that we have to be tackling these questions together. Now, where does Africa come in? Of course, Africa is a community of destiny with Europe. When we think of the next 50 years, Africa and Europe have to be facing these challenges together. Pandemics, again, international security, once again, climate change, even more so. Europe and Africa will have to find solutions hand in hand together. At the same time, African integration is a process that is very much, it has wind in its sails. The African Continental Free Trade Area was mentioned by Domenico. It came into effect in 2021. It is the largest free trade area of the world in terms of geography. It truly covers the entire continent. And now the issue is how do we implement that? How do we deepen the integration from what has been agreed? I have been working with youth organizations on the African continent that are dedicated to this topic. Next week, I will be attending in person in Tanzania a conference of 1,000 young Africans who are gathering together to discuss solutions to Africa's future challenges, including the integration of the Continental Free Trade Area. This is going to take place at the East African Community headquarters in Arusha in Tanzania. And this goes to show that there really is a momentum for discussing these topics. There are young people who have ideas, who want to deepen this integration. There are dedicated groups, not only to the continental free trade area, but also to the free movement of persons within the African continent. These groups, they are talking about topics like trans-border infrastructure within Africa, about climate, about entrepreneurship, about supporting young people who want to establish digital businesses in other countries. There's so many avenues for where African integration can lead. And I think as people who have been studying European integration and the history of it, we must feel very inspired by all of these things. We have seen the benefits of this approach within the European continent. I believe that within the African continent, this can lead to something very great. And that's something where federalism can come in. I believe that the World Federalist movement has to be an arena that empowers African federalists, young people, other people from Africa who have ideas for integration to articulate those ideas at the global level, so that we also have African ideas within these discussions on world federalism, so that we can exchange further on the federal experiences from across the world, because I think these federalist ideas are really something that can bring added value to a debate. I will mention the Agenda 2063, the Africa We Want document. This is a document by the African Union that lays out the vision for where Africa should be in the year 2063. It is an excellent document that I recommend warmly for all of you to look at. In particular, there's one very interesting line in it, which is that by 2030, there should be consensus on the government, on the continental government and its institutions, with a view to achieving political unity of Africa by 2063. Now, if we look at that, we are coming into 2023. The target is in 7 years. So according to an official document of the African Union, in 7 years, there ought to be consensus on the government of Africa and how it's going to be structured. That calls for federalism. That calls for ideas by federalist thinkers within Africa who can make their voices heard in these debates, who can keep this debate alive, who can bring these policy proposals to governments. I believe that this is a great arena for us to support that. For us to share experiences, but above all, to empower those voices who are there to promote these ideas. And just to reiterate, these organizations, they are better organized, they are bigger than we might imagine. I'm going to attend a conference of more than 500 young people in person, traveling from all across the continent, overcoming logistical difficulties, taking the initiative to come together. This is something that we rarely see in Europe, and it's happening in Africa each year. It's something that I was shocked to learn about when I learned about this. This inspires me deeply, and I believe that being aware of these things, being able to integrate these groups together would be a great mission for us for the next decades. In very concrete terms, there are several organizations, both at the European and at the African continent, who are working on topics of European integration, African integration, and Euro-African integration together. We have developed these cooperations. Domenico mentioned the Torino conference, where different organizations came together. Within the African continent, there has been a lot of network building this year for these organizations to come together. So I believe if we can create a credible umbrella structure, something that brings added value to all of these organizations, something that can bring these groups together, not working in silos, but truly coming up with ideas for this intercontinental global integration, that would be a great achievement for us. This is the road that we are now on. The Transnational Working Group on Africa-Europe Relations has been working on these topics for the past months. I really hope that we can come up with more deliverables and that we can turn this vision of an intercontinental global integration into reality. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Juzo, for your contribution. That was very informative, and I look forward to hearing about the outcome of that event in Arusha. Up next, we have Nicola Valinotto, who has been an active member of the Movimento Federalista Europeo, also known as MFE Italy, since 1988. So he joined the WFM Executive Committee in 2021 and is an international democracy activist and scholar. He's also the co-founder of the International Democracy Watch and co-author of the Democratization of International Institutions, Past International Democracy Report. Nicola serves as an MFE volunteer in many campaigns and rallies during several European Council meetings. And he also promoted and organized the European Citizens Initiative, New Deal for Europe. So today, Nicola will be speaking on the importance of European and global integration. Nicola, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hemi. Thank you, Daphne. Thank you, Luis. Thank you, Georgia, for to organize the meeting of today, because it was very hard and difficult, but at the end we succeeded to organize it, and it's a pleasure for me to be here and to represent also the Italian and World Federalists. And I would like to, in my intervention, to speak about Ventotene Manifesto, because Domenico De Vesa, in his intervention this afternoon, spoke about that we need to take again the Ventotene Manifesto, and also we need to update it. We need the Ventotene Manifesto 2.0. I think that if we have to update the manifesto, we should address a final chapter to the globalization process. As we know, in the last 20 years, during our century, the 21st century, we had many global crises. We had the financial crisis in 2007, starting in the US. We had the immigration crisis, not only in Europe, but all over the world. We have the climate crisis. Every day we see the consequences of the climate crisis. We have, in the last 2 years, we had the pandemic crisis. We have the social crisis. We have so many inequalities all over the world. And this year we had the war crisis between Russia and Ukraine. But the biggest crisis, according to me, is the democratic crisis, because all the things are happening at the world level, and at those level we don't have any democratic rule. Who control at the world level? We don't have any democracy. Where we take the decision at the national level, the decision don't count anymore. So in order to address all these global crises, we should take care we should care for the planet, and we must govern globalization. Democracy must be implemented at all levels, from local to the global. If we don't want to suffer from globalization, we must govern it. It's not easy task, but we should start. We should start with intermediate steps. Speaking about the World Federation is a long time objective, but we must focus on some intermediate steps. I make you some example. We have the World Health Organization. This organization could manage pandemics in a different way, financing the development and the dissemination of vaccines among the population in developing areas by collecting a small part of a global tax on the profit of a large multinational, such as the big pharma. Or we can also speak about a global organization for the environment that could manage the consequences of climate change and work to prevent them by collecting a small part of a global tax on carbon emissions. These are only 2 examples. But at the general level, I think we need also at the world level an Earth Constitution that would set the reference framework for the rights and duties of all citizens of the world, with a distribution of the global functions needed to manage the common planetary goods. And as Andrea is a long fighter for the UN reforms, we need to transform the General Assembly of the UN into a parliamentary assembly, so it can become a real parliament. and the Security Council must become the council of the great regions of the world in order to represent the population of the whole planet. All these objectives will be possible only with a great mobilization of the global civil society, which in alliance with the most innovative governments can overcome the obstacles set by governments of the most reluctant to change. After that, I would like to mention a national congress we had in Bari, in Italy, organized in 1980 by the Italian chapter of UF, the Movimento Federalista Europeo, that in that congress adopted a slogan, "Unite Europe to unite the world," giving a priority to the European integration process. 40 years later, I think that slogan needs to be updated and should become "Unite Europe and unite the world." This change is needed because the process of globalization has advanced and all main crises can only be addressed at a global level. For this reason, the process of a political union of the European continent and the process of democratization of international organization must proceed in parallel, as in a kind of a spiral in which the two paths of European and world integration intersect and feed off each other. To conclude, the Italian European Federalists should update the 1980s motto and work together with the World Federalists to unite Europe and unite the world by creating multi-level federal institutions from local to the global to handle problems in their complexity. It's time to act together. Let's do it now.
Thank you, Nicola, for sharing these concrete ideas with us. That's a really great contribution. Last but certainly not least, I would like to introduce our final speaker for this panel, Kennedy Karanja. So Kennedy is the organizing lead for the East African chapter of the Young World Federalists and is currently studying international studies. Kennedy has future plans of specializing in international political economy, diplomacy, and regional integration. He's also a certified investment analyst. In addition to this, Kennedy volunteers in youth organizations to spread awareness of the business opportunities in the East African community and assists local and international firms to tap into the $200 billion common market. So this is in line with Kennedy's belief that a world state can be best achieved through an economic integration approach, something similar to the European Union model. In his free time, Kennedy likes to paint, write, and hike in nature. Over to you, Kennedy. Kennedy, are you with us? I see you online, but we don't see you or hear you. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, great. We can hear you.
Oh, okay. My name is Kennedy Karanja. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I represent the African continent and in particular the East African community. I think that this is a very good opportunity for both continents, especially Africa, which has come of age. And we are guided by the spirit of Pan-Africanism, and we have seen that Africa is starting to acquire prominence on the world stage because of continental integration. And this is manifested in the common positions that Africa has taken in international forums in regard to the reforms, the United Nations Security Council, its position on the climate change, and its efforts to address common challenges in development, international trade, environment, and public health issues. I am one of the generation of the new Pan-Africanist. We're very concerned about how Africa is over-dependent on the external world economically, and even in terms of technological know-how. and we are concerned about Africa's failure to exploit our potential at national, regional, and continental levels with respect to trade, education, and health, and especially mobilization of the diaspora who can assist in economic development of our continent. We want to reverse the asymmetrical global power relations that have subordinated Africa an inferior position in international relations. One document that I can point out is the Eswatini Consensus of 2005, or the Common African Position on the Proposed Reform of the United Nations, which noted that in 1945, when the UN was created, most of Africa was not represented. And in 1963, when the first reform took place, Africa was represented, but not in a particularly powerful position. And Africa's goal now is to be fully represented in all decision-making organs of the United Nations, particularly in the Security Council, because we're in a position to influence the proposed UN reforms by retaining our unity of purpose. The African Union declared the 21st century is the beginning of the African millennium, and we're taking a more assertive role in world affairs by creating new institutions such as Pan-African Parliament, the Peace and Security Council, the African Standby Force, the new Partnership for Africa's Development, and the African peer review mechanisms to ensure that these are levers that you can use to eventually create a union government for Africa. In regards to the relationship between the African Union and the United Nations, one of the most pivotal moments was the Cairo Declaration, which transformed the relationship between Africa and Europe from paternalism to one based on mutual trust and respect. And this was once again re-emphasized in the joint African Union European Union strategy of 2007, which is a joint agreement between the African Union and the European Union, and it was based on a principle of partnership of equals. And for the first time, the European Union treated Africa as a single entity, signaling a departure from the previous EU's approach to EU's previously fragmented approach to Africa. So this is something that has created a lot of solidarity between the African Union and the European Union. It has also created an elaborate architecture that has engaged civil society, and it has enabled Africa and Europe to adopt a common position on certain global issues. Some of these global issues are peace and security, trade and regional integration, global goals, climate change, energy, science, mobility and employment, democratic governance, and human rights. So this is very consistent with the Montreux Declaration, which says that we consider that integration of activities at regional and functional levels is consistent with a true federal approach. The formation of regional federations, insofar as they do not become an end to themselves or run the risk of crystallizing into blocks, can and should contribute to the effective functioning of the federal government. In the same way, the solution of technical, scientific, and cultural problems which concern all the peoples of the world will be made easier by the establishment of specialist functional bodies. So in my mind, I believe that the work of the World Federalist movement, transnational working group, is an extension of this idea because we seek to continue partnerships by calling for enhanced dialogue, not limited to African issues, but extending to global issues as well. And the committee, the Transnational Working Group Committee on Sustainable Development and Climate and Biodiversity, wants to deepen this African Union and European Union partnerships to promote human security, stop illegal migrations to Europe, assist in climate change adaptation and mitigation, and create common prosperity for all of us. So I'm going to outline a few recommendations and a few programs that we are thinking about. The first one is to promote ratification of the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, and the adoption of its numerous measures that can aid state parties to institutionalize economic and corporate governance. So we seek to support the Pan-African architecture and governance in this regard because development and governance are closely tied. So this is going to deliver private-public partnerships, promote the expansion of the private sector, and ensure that the economic climate is very viable for investment and foreign capital. Secondly, we want one of the other ideas that we have is to the civil society to encourage reforms in multilateral trading organizations, such as the World Trade Organization, which have allowed a strict system of protection of property rights to augment, and this marginalizes African economies by preventing market access, as well as limiting the abilities to adopt and adapt new technologies and production methods. This impairs several sectors, but most affected is the agricultural sector, and the impact on food security can be seen in relation to small-scale production, which is quite predominant in Africa. The reduction in of import tariffs, which is one of the obligations of the Agreement of Agriculture that was signed under the WTO, has been found to be the cause of import surges in some countries, and it has led to food imports, which have led to a decline in domestic food production. To contextualize, the liberalization of the agricultural sector has only happened in Africa, but it has not been replicated in developed countries, which have they support their agricultural sectors with subsidies, and they have high levels of protectionism, which undermines the African agricultural sector. These conditions ultimately lead to disengagement of governments and the openness of these economies, which now face more demanding foreign markets and a free flow of cheaper foreign products. So Africa's industry, Africa's industry are produced at a high cost because of the labor-intensive nature, but they are outcompeted by foreign companies which adopt more efficient methods of production. We must work together to increase the transparency and inclusivity of the procedures used to draft consensus text for WTO negotiations. We must also investigate the agreement on agriculture to ensure that it considers the interests of African nations, and we must also ensure that patent protection does not impede public health and it does not deny us access to manufacture pharmaceuticals and medicines, which we need, especially in the light of HIV and other pandemics. Another issue that we would like to address is the issue of climate change. Africa is the continent that is most vulnerable to climate change and climate variability. 1/3 of people in Africa live in drought-prone areas and are vulnerable to the impacts of droughts and floods. These impacts compound health problems, especially diarrhea, cholera, and malaria. So we recommend that countries reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases by at least 95% by 2050 compared to 1990 levels, and to ensure the environmental integrity of these targets, which will create a consensus that offsets are limited to 10% and the existing loopholes are closed. And secondly, we should agitate for the European Union and other developed countries to contribute to the Green Climate Fund to help poor nations cut emissions and adapt to a warmer world. And we need a joint African Union and European Union effort to create a climate change treaty that will be binding on all nations. So as we make extensive preparations to deal with the complexity of these issues, by starting to raise our public awareness, by developing capacity for knowledge, we need to also ensure that Africa, African states demonstrate the ability to use the adaptation funds effectively, honestly, and for the intended purpose if they want to have a good cause when we negotiate for these kinds of funds. And lastly, lack of integration of potential adaptation mechanisms is another hindrance to us solving this problem. So we need an integrated continental-wide approach that goes beyond national boundaries to help in development of effective and realistic adaptations, and to integrate these initiatives with other measures such as land use planning, water resource management, drought warning, desertification control, healthcare, and agriculture diversification. As I conclude, I would like to applaud the cooperation between the World Federalist Movement and civil associations such as ICOYACA and Young World Federalist East Africa, because we are very vital in creating an African nationalism, which is a bottom-up process where Africans will feel solidarity with other Africans, regardless of the positions that the political elites in their countries take on these issues. African federalization and regionalization will only take root if the common citizen is aware that there's another level of governance that they can reach out when the national government is failing deliberately or is not able to deliver basic common goods such as food, water, shelter, health, and education. So without prejudging the results of these two methods of approach, we must expand our action as quickly as possible so that we may take advantage of any new opportunities which present themselves to the federalist cause. One thing is certain, we shall never realize world federal government unless all the peoples of the world join in the crusade. In the East African community, some of these opportunities are presenting themselves, such as more Kenyans deciding to take the appeal decisions made in the Supreme Court of Kenya to the East African Court of Justice, and the East African Stand by Force sending its troops to the Eastern DRC to restore peace and stability. This shows that regionalization and federalization are taking place, and more than ever, time presses, and this time we must not fail. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kennedy. That was very educational. It's a shame we couldn't see your face, but thank you for sharing your ideas and offering us a different perspective, and for interrogating the global political system a little bit. And thank you once again to all the panelists for your amazing contributions. We would like to now open the floor up for questions. When asking your questions, kindly let us know your name, where you're from, and who the question is directed to. So maybe, yes, I'll come to you, Domenico, but maybe Nicola or Daphne can help me to identify some questions from the room as I check the online chat for questions. So if you're participating online and wish to ask a question, kindly drop it in the chat.
Sorry, Ami, I would like just to recall that we will have 5 minutes because we have some delays in the program.
Right.
So we will not have a lot of time for really questions. But if there is any question from the room here. So Jorge would like to raise a point. Yes, please.
Yeah, it was a question. It is directed to Kennedy. First of all, congratulations, Kennedy, for the way you are organizing the Young World Federalist in East Africa. You're doing a great job. I was very proud when I saw the pictures from the Week for World Parliament. And I wanted to know if any people, if members from Icoyaca were present at the event, and which concrete actions, because I remember I talked to David, to the president of Icoyaca, but I don't know if maybe we can start sending articles to their newsletters so that step by step, the World Federalist ideas can start getting into well, their view of how the world should be and what we have to do to improve it. Thank you.
Ami, I don't know if there are other questions from the room here. So please see with Kennedy or no, or Domenico. Domenico would like also to raise something. Please see, and let's try to finish in 5 minutes.
No, not a question, but just a reminiscence for user. I was present at the Chef Unification Congress in 1972. I see that the Federalist organization has excellent heirs. That's all. Thanks.
Okay. Kennedy, would you like to respond to Jorge at this point, or you'll do it bilaterally? Kennedy, would you like to respond to Jorge? Okay, Daphne, if there's no more questions, maybe we can take the break.
Many thanks, Ami, and many thanks to all the panelists for this exchange. I think it was really, it's a very ambitious, newly established transnational working group, and we have several other initiatives in the area of governance also. We have plans concerning the access to drinking water and sanitation. We hope to go ahead next year for a very specific event on this, because this is really a key issue in the development of the list of fundamental rights. So that's all from my side, and let's have the final closing remarks. Many thanks to the panelists and to you, Amy. Okay. Okay. The UF presidents and the presidents of the Spinelli group just say that he has an urgency, so it will not be possible for him to join us for the final conclusion. Fernando, you will have the role to conclude this big event. We discussed a lot the whole afternoon concerning the way to join forces. We refer to this historical moment for the Federalists, European and World Federalists. There was a lot of reference also to this new ideological danger, the increased risk to have movement ethno-populism. I like the new expression. I learned from my friend George. We discussed about the ecological challenges for for all continents, for all of us. And now I would like to see with you, Fernando, how we can go ahead. We start discussing this cooperation between EU and Africa, but we would like to have something more structural, if possible, for the next period. What can be the way to proceed, having in mind your huge experience, both on European and global federalism, and what can be the method we would like to promote in order to deliver results or to be more concrete for the next period, and what will be the way to proceed also.
Yeah, thank you very much, Daphne. They are very interesting questions, and the meeting was exceptional. I have so many things to speak about. I'm sorry not to be able to comment every intervention, but let's start by the beginning. We Federalists, we are used to manifestos. So let's start by a very well-known manifesto at the end, and let's use the phrase, Federalists of the world unite. I think this is the basic agreement in this meeting. Everybody has his vision, everybody has a personal view, organizational view, but everybody agreed on the need of union and on the necessity of working together. Of course, this was related to World Federalists and European Federalists. But this is other things. Let me recall your attention to this trilogy. Camila, Amy, and Sushi. Three women from the South. So this is not only about working together, the European Federalists and the World Federalists. It's also about working together, the women and the men, and the South and the North. For a long time, I was kidding on the executive committee of the World Federalist Movement, saying something which was a little provocative, that we were not the World Federalist Movement, but the first World Federalist Movement. But no, this is changing, and this is very encouraging. Also, something which is very new for us, which is the amazing presence of so many young people, very well prepared, working on concrete things close to the Federalist values, and this is also a novelty because we had a new generation and I am very proud to be here and to have this enormous responsibility of giving the conclusions in front of the veterans, those who were fighting on the streets when federalism was just an utopia and the regional integration of Europe was an utopia. I refer to Guido Montani, Lucio Levi, Jean-Francois Billion. I'm forgetting somebody, but this connection between the new generations and the veterans is also part of the idea of Federalists of the world unite. Well, there is also the new board, almost many integrants of the new board of the executive committee, starting by John, also Nicola and Daphne. And this is also encouraging because we needed a renovation. With all due respect with those who were at the front line for so many decades, but we needed a renovation, and I think the renovation is proceeding in a very well manner, integrating the old guard, but looking to the future. And this is a recipe. And I'm also proud to be here. I didn't mention Andreas, who was the ideologist and the promoter of such an important campaign like the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, and Jo Leinen, who was so supportive to him and to the campaign. So there are so many elements of the past that and the present that make us to look with optimism to the future. So let's go back to the basic thing. What is this about? And the crucial question, in my opinion, is the old question of which is the best path for a world federation. And this is an ongoing polemic from since at least the end of the Second World War, and we had so many answers. Einstein thought that the answer was, let's create a world government in order to avoid nuclear proliferation and to keep the control of the formula, etc. And he organized meetings at the Princeton University and his house there to organize a cellular or world federalists working together for a world government on the nuclear thing. Bertrand Russell, he thought that it should start by the union of democracies, and this is very close to some Joe Biden idea of the alliance of democracy against autocracies. So I'm not going to enter too much, but this was another important idea that in the present situation, it should reinvigorate the method. The European Federalists say Europe first and then the war, and this was a very strong idea and a very successful one. And World Federalists thought that the United Nations could be the embryo of world government or world governance or whatever. And this is still an ongoing process that maybe we can contribute to. So there are so many visions, and here I hear about these proposals. I'm going directly to United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, International Criminal Court, European Parliament, regional integration in Europe and outside Europe, the Latin American Criminal Court against organized crime, and just on the orbit of the United Nations, the reform of the Charter, the United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, and also a new proposal about creating a new council inside the United Nations. So many ideas about institutional building, which I think is our matter as Federalists. I'm going to mention another two that were not quoted here. There is a campaign for creating a court against ecocide, so ecological crime. Many of the promoters think this should be inside the International Criminal Statute, which is very difficult because you need unanimity, and maybe it's easier to make outside, but let's see. And there is another interesting campaign about creating an international court against corruption, which is promoted by an American judge. And let's get a look on the internet because it's very easy. So many proposals. Well, we can say this in two different ways. So the pessimistic one, which is diversity is our most valuable resources, but it's also our drama and our damnation. But we can say, look at this on the opposite way, saying exactly the same thing, which is diversity is our drama, our damnation, but it is also our most valuable resource. And I think this is the appropriate view about this, because nobody knows. So the whole question is, which is the best path for a world federation? So nobody knows. Nobody knew at the end of the Second World War, and we had two divergent strategies that at the end were very effective in some way, because we have a complete revolution in the European scenario, from the scenario of the war, the genocide, and the misery, and people escaping from Europe from the present. It's an amazing change. And there was also a success of the United Nations. There is a phrase of the second Secretary General. So he was from Sweden, and my Swedish language, it says Hammarskjöld or something like that, Dag Hammarskjöld. He said that the United Nations were not created to put paradise on earth, but to avoid hell. And I think that till the moment, so right now, hell was avoided. There was not a third world war, there was not a nuclear war. We were close, maybe we are close, but by the moment, so before the creation of the United Nations, in the previous 30 years, we had two world wars. After the creation of the United Nations, we had no any world war. And this is, so we can criticize, we can say there were other conflicts, and we need a renovation of the United Nations. This is the old United Nations, and we need a new United Nations in order to face the change. We can say a lot of things, but it was a success to avoid a third world war, and we have to recognize that. Okay, where we are? Well, if we look at the elements of the political power, the three basic political powers, the judiciary, the parliamentary, and the executive power, well, we are in the middle of a process, if we look this way. In the judiciary way, we have the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court. Of course, we can also criticize the limits, etc., but we have something we didn't have before. In terms of parliamentary power, there is the United Nations General Assembly, and maybe in future, United Nations Parliamentary Assembly, not the General Assembly, but the parliamentary. So we have something, we need something more. And the executive power, the proposal of a council in the United Nations is a very interesting one, but we do have also some collegiate executive power, which is the G7 and the G20. I know they are not democratic. I know there are big powers. I know, but in history, political power were never created in a democratic way. Maybe the foundation of the United States, maybe, but all the rest of the real powers were created in an undemocratic way. The monarchs, the kings, the emperors, etc., and they became democratic through a process, and this is where we are. I don't know if the G7 or the G20 are going to reform themselves. Nobody knows. Here also nobody knows. But we have some kind of embryo of some kind of collegiate executive power we should influence and register as part of the reality. So, what are we doing in the future if nobody knows? Well, we heard some, and this is an answer to your question about the method. I think we should reflect on our method and our history. It's very interesting, the the Guido proposal about a global Green Deal, but I think we should reconnect this with institutional proposals. It's a long time we have a small polemic with Andreas, because I am, for years, I have been telling him, why not a United Nations Parliamentary Assembly only for this question that tends to unite the world in front of the menace of the climate change instead of nuclear proliferation and other things. This is not easy, but we should, I don't know if my idea is a good idea. Andrea say it's not, but okay, nobody knows. But we should think about this. Our history was connected with two amazing successes. At the European level, the regional integration and European Union, which is not only commercial, it's political, with a nucleus, a democratic core, which is this parliament. So, the European Parliament. And at the global level, the International Criminal Court, the parliamentary and the judiciary. Let's see at what we did in a very appropriate way, because we were not a strong organization. Amnesty was bigger, and Human Rights Watch was bigger, and here also there were a lot of organizations working on regional integration, but the Federalists, the European Federalists and the World Federalists were able to be the vanguard, to connect with the need of the times, and to rejoin all these organizations together under an idea. And this is, I think, our Federalist method. This is our method for the future: institutional building, and knowing that we were and we are going to be a minority, but we can be the catalyzer of civil society, and after that have governments on board for the regional integration. I think about Spinelli being the counselor of Alcide de Gasperi, or also with national governments that supported the creation of the International Criminal Court. I think this is my conclusion about what's the lesson of our history recommend for our future. And I repeat, thank you very much, Daphne, for your efforts. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I think this was a very, very interesting meeting, and I think this is the beginning of something. Let's see.
Thank you very much, Fernando. You know also that we have finalized a political declaration as the results of all this preparatory work for the event. Let me, from my side, also to thank first the presidents of the UF, Sandro Gozzi, who is also president of the Spinelli Group, who support from the beginning this initiative. To thank also of the UF, Dominic De Vesa, who support the initiative, also came to share with us his views about the cooperation between both organizations. You, of course, Fernando, John for the World Federalist Movement, who support us a lot at different steps. Many thanks to Guido, Lucio, and Nicolas, because I don't know how many hours we spent coordinating things since the summer. Ami and Luis from the World Federalist Movement, who help us a lot. Alexandra and Thelma, who helped us also a lot from Sandro's office and from the Secretariat of the UF, Pablo, and of course Jorge, who really helped us. I don't know how many hours he has spent for the preparation of this event. Of course, many thanks to the speakers, the moderators, all the participants online and in presence. This was really a pleasure to have these events after so many years of silence, hoping that we don't have to wait years of silence to have the follow-up event in Europe or in another continent. That is a big challenge now. And probably I would like to invite you for a photo for all of us.